Imagine waking up one day and discovering that you have been discarded, thrown to die in an unforgiving desert by your own father. This is the story of Ishmael, Abraham's firstborn son, who went from heir to exile overnight. No water, no food, no hope. But when all seemed lost, something happened. What turned this abandoned boy into the leader of a great nation? What really happened in that desert? Stay until the end, because this story will surprise you. Imagine being the firstborn of a man chosen by God, but ending up abandoned in the middle of a desert with no guarantee of survival. This is the amazing story of Ishmael, Abraham's son, who saw his life change drastically in a single instant. How would you react if everything you knew was taken away from you in such a cruel way? In this video, you'll discover how Ishmael, a young man who seemed destined for oblivion, found strength in adversity and made the desert his home. This narrative is full of twists and turns, betrayals and miracles, showing how fate can take unexpected turns when all seems lost. If you want to understand how Ishmael overcame impossible challenges and shaped his own future, keep watching. And of course, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and leave your like so you don't miss any of the next inspiring stories from the Bible. Get ready to embark on a journey of pain, resilience, and, above all, hope. This is a story that still teaches us valuable lessons about faith and overcoming. In a faraway land, there lived a man called Abraham. He was a faithful follower of God, someone whose devotion and loyalty were unquestionable. From a young age, Abraham believed in God's promises, which assured him that he would be the father of a great nation. However, as the years went by, this promise seemed more and more unattainable. Time, always relentless, left its mark on his face and on the heart of his wife, Sarah. Abraham was already an old man, and Sarah, who had accompanied him for so many years, was also feeling the weight of age. The dream of holding a son in her arms was becoming more and more distant. The evenings, once filled with conversations about the future, were replaced by silences filled with uncertainty. Deep down, they both wondered if there was still time for the promise to come true. Then, one night under a starry sky, Abraham heard God's voice again, soft as the wind that blew around him. The promise was reaffirmed. He would have descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. Abraham, without fully understanding the paths that fate was taking, remained firm in his faith. But the uncertainty about when this promise would be fulfilled continued to plague him. Sarah, on the other hand, could no longer hide her anguish. Every glance exchanged between the couple carried the pain of endless waiting. Time seemed to be against them, and every new wrinkle on her face was a cruel reminder of this. As the days slowly passed, Sarah began to devise a desperate solution. One morning, as the golden light of the sun illuminated the tent, Sarah approached Abraham. His eyes, which had already witnessed so many stories, now reflected disquiet. With a firm voice, but full of sadness, she said, "Abraham, the Lord has prevented me from having children. Take my handmaid Hagar. Perhaps through her I will be able to start a family." Her words were simple and direct, but they concealed a whirlwind of emotions. Sarah knew she was proposing something unusual, but the pain of waiting and the desire to see the promise realized were greater. After a brief moment of hesitation, Abraham accepted his wife's suggestion, aware that this decision would have profound implications. Hagar, the young Egyptian servant, was called and informed of her new role. With no say in the choice, she found herself at the center of a plot she could never have imagined. What seemed like a momentary solution actually set in motion a series of events that would change the course of history forever. Inside Hagar's tent, the silence was thick, almost palpable. The young servant girl, who until then had lived in the shadow of her masters, was now carrying the son of the great Abraham in her womb. With every movement of the baby in her womb, The reality of her new position became more evident. Once just a servant, she was now directly linked to the fate of a nation. As the pregnancy progressed, something unexpected began to grow in Hagar's heart. The submissiveness that had previously marked her gaze gave way to a new feeling: pride. She, the servant, was bearing the son that Sarah had never been able to have. Fate seemed to have granted her a role she had never imagined she would occupy. However, this change did not go unnoticed. Sarah, who had previously seen Hagar only as a means to an end, now noticed the subtle transformation in her attitude. The look in her eyes, which had once been humble, now carried a spark of haughtiness, a sign that Hagar saw her own value. The tension between the two women grew every day like a taut rope about to snap. What had begun as a solution to a problem became a source of pain and resentment. The air inside Abraham's tent was filled with heavy silences and averted glances. Sarah, who had once willingly offered her servant, now felt tormented by emotions she couldn't control. Every gesture of Hagar's, every hint of pride, ignited a deep resentment. The weight of this reality turned into hostility. What had once been a relatively peaceful coexistence became a silent dispute. Hagar, sensing Sarah's growing coldness and contempt, began to feel suffocated inside her own home. The atmosphere had become unbearable. Each day, the tension intensified until Hagar could bear it no longer. Overcome by despair, she made a drastic decision. She would run away. Even before dawn, while everyone was asleep, Hagar grabbed a few things and set off. The cold, early morning wind enveloped her body as her feet touched the desert sand. Everything she knew was left behind. But the desert, relentless as ever, quickly showed its cruel side. The hot sand hurt his feet, the sun burned his skin, and the scarcity of water turned his escape into an almost suicidal journey. His steps became heavier with each passing moment, and the strength he carried with him seemed to drain away with each breath of the arid wind. When she could go on no longer, Hagar found a small well in the middle of the desert. There, exhausted and defeated, she burst into tears. The tears fell silently, mingling with the desert dust. She felt forgotten, abandoned, aimless. Then something unexpected happened. In the midst of that overwhelming silence, a soft, authoritative voice called her name. "Hagar, servant of Sarah, where do you come from, and where are you going?" Startled, she looked up and saw before her a radiant being, an angel of the Lord. Trembling, Hagar told him everything, her pain, her escape, the suffering that had brought her to that place. The angel, in a calm but firm voice, replied, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her, for I will multiply your descendants so that they will be countless." The words sounded heavy, but they were accompanied by a powerful promise. "You will bear a son and name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your suffering." Hagar, her heart still racing, felt a wave of peace invade her chest. God had seen her. God had heard her cry. She was not alone. With this new certainty, she got up and returned to Abraham's house. She knew she would face challenges, but now she carried with her a divine promise. The child growing inside her was destined for a great future. And so, with her womb carrying God's promise, Hagar walked back, ready to face what was to come. Time passed, and finally Hagar gave birth to a boy. As instructed by the angel, she named him Ishmael, which means God hears. The name was a constant reminder that, even in the most difficult times, God had heard her cry and given her a promise. Ishmael grew up strong, healthy, and full of life. For years, he was Abraham's only son, the one who carried his inheritance, his attention, and, for Hagar, his hope. However, fate still had surprises in store. The impossible happened. Sarah, in her old age, became pregnant. The news spread quickly through the camp, and the laughter of disbelief that had once filled her heart was replaced by the laughter of joy. God had kept his promise. When the baby was born, he was given the name Isaac, which means laughter. He was the long-awaited son, the heir to the promise, the boy who showed that nothing is impossible for God. But along with the joy of the birth also came new tensions. Ishmael, now an energetic young man, was no longer Abraham's only son. His father's gaze, previously directed only at him, was now divided between him and the newborn. Years passed, and the rivalry between the two brothers grew in silence. Until one day, in the middle of a big celebration for Isaac's weaning, something seemingly small became the trigger for a big change. Ishmael laughed. For many, it might have been just a trivial gesture, a joking laugh between brothers. But for Sarah, that laugh carried something deeper. For her, it wasn't just an innocent joke. It was a reminder that Ishmael was the firstborn, the one who could challenge Isaac's place. Sarah's heart was filled with trepidation. She could not allow Ishmael to jeopardize her son's future. That night, seized by an implacable determination, Sarah sought out Abraham. Her voice was firm, but there was a weight to her words. "Expel this woman and her son. Ishmael will not inherit with my son, Isaac." Abraham felt the blow of these words like a sharp blade. Ishmael was his son, flesh of his flesh, blood of his blood. The thought of sending him away tore at his heart, but Sarah was determined. For her, Isaac was the son of promise, and nothing could threaten his future. Troubled, Abraham sought God in prayer, and God answered, "Don't worry about the boy or his mother. Do as Sarah asks, for it is through Isaac that your descendants will be called. But I will also make of the son of the handmaid a great nation, for he is her descendant." With a heavy heart, Abraham knew what needed to be done. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen over the horizon, he prepared a jug of water and some bread. He handed them to Hagar, and with a sad look on his face, led the way into the desert. Hagar took Ishmael's hand and left. No words were spoken, for nothing that could be said would lessen the pain of that separation. Abraham watched as the two walked away, until their figures disappeared over the horizon. The desert would once again be the scene of a merciless ordeal. The scorching sun beat down on the desert sand, making each step more difficult. Hagar and Ishmael walked aimlessly, their water jug emptying quickly. With every drop that disappeared, so did hope. Hagar felt the weight of exhaustion and despair. Her son, who used to run full of energy, was now staggering with fatigue and thirst. His lips were cracked, his breathing labored. Until, without the strength to continue, Ishmael fell to the ground. Hagar's heart broke. She couldn't bear to see her son die before her eyes. With tears streaming down her face, she took a few steps away and sat down under a withered tree. "I can't watch him die," she whispered, covering her face with her hands as she sobbed. The silence of the desert seemed to mock her pain. But suddenly, a voice echoed in the midst of that solitude. "Hagar, why are you crying? Don't be afraid. God has heard the voice of the boy where he is." Hagar opened her eyes and saw before her an angel of the Lord. Her heart, previously choked with despair, quickened with a mixture of fear and hope. "Get up and help the boy to his feet," said the angel, "for I will make of him a great nation." And then, as if the desert itself had surrendered to the divine promise, Hagar saw a well of water appear before her. Without hesitation, she ran to it, filled the bottle, and gave Ishmael a drink. The life that had seemed to fade away returned to the boy. What had once been despair now became hope. At that moment, Hagar understood that God had not abandoned them. On the contrary, he had always been with them, listening to their suffering and preparing a future she couldn't imagine. Over time, Ishmael grew strong and became a skilled warrior. In the desert, he learned to survive, hunt, and lead. What had once been an abandoned boy now became a man of great strength and determination. And so, according to God's promise, Ishmael gave birth to a great nation. His descendants spread out, becoming a numerous and powerful people. His story, marked by pain and overcoming, continues to echo down the centuries, reminding us that even in the most difficult situations, God sees us, hears us, and never abandons us. Perhaps, like Ishmael, you have faced times when you seem to be alone, with no way out. But his story teaches us that even in the most arid desert, there is hope. If this story has inspired you, share in the comments a moment when you felt that God heard your prayer. And don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories from the Bible.